It's still bright but chilly across the northern parts, so across Scotland. Further south, still relatively mild for the time being, but as we go through the weekend, we are going to see that Arctic air in the north plunging its way southwards, so temperatures for all dropping.
Expect warm spells with the odd rude interruption. Box Boiler sponsors the weather on GB News.
We could be delivering the perfect Christmas to you this year. There's £30,000 in tax-free cash to make 2026 the best year yet. A further £10,000 cash to spend on gifts for all the family. There's £1,000 to spend in your favourite supermarket. And a festively themed GB News goodie bag. And we'll get it all to you in time for the big day. For another chance to win, text WIN to 63225. One entry costs £2.50 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63225. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start at £2.50. Call 0903 686 3232. Calls cost £2.50 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB 17 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 4 p.m. on the 28th of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Bold.
They are under no illusion.
Ray.
Are you a human trafficker?
Boundless. I've had enough of the nonsense, and I'm not afraid to say it.
Don't get us on the BBC.
Every weeknight, I tear through the headlines.
The smell of gasoline. Should we be worried about it?
From Westminster madness to cultural war chaos.
What we're going to do now is they are throwing things out the car as we speak.
Get ready, Britain. Here we go. Patrick Christie tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation,
No,
Because the failure is...
You're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff.
Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood.
So join me on Jubes & Kerr weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
From the school run to the home run, watch a new show for all of Britain.
He can say whatever he wants.
A straight talking show where all voices are heard.
And, you know, when are we going to stop talking about smashing the gangs and actually do it?
With the stories that matter from every part of our country.
There's a bit of a crash landing there for your Chancellor.
Bold, fearless and standing up for you. That's me, Martin Daubney, 3 p.m. till 6 p.m, weekdays, here only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight.
Is the President prepared to bankrupt the BBC?
The President has made it very clear that this is a leftist propaganda machine that is unfortunately subsidized by British taxpayers.
A new development for the embattled BBC. A whistleblower has told the Daily Telegraph that Newsnight aired another doctored clip of President Trump in 2022, 2 years before the Panorama scandal. With a £750 million lawsuit looming and the deadline for apology just hours away, can Auntie be saved? Also tonight, economic growth slowed to 0.1% in the last quarter, lower than was forecast. Still reeling from the repercussions of a cyber attack on Jaguar Land Rover last month, should today's figures be cause for celebration or dread ahead of the budget? Plus... A piece of cloth from Hitler's bunker taken by an American soldier has allowed genetic scientists to prove the age-old legend that the dictator did only have one of you-know-what. History has a remarkable trend of myths and legends turning out to be true. And...
Finally, my lords, this is not an assisted dying bill. It is an assisted suicide bill.
Assisted suicide begins its committee stage in the House of Lords tomorrow, a chance for peers to scrutinise or perhaps put the bill out of its misery. Dame Esther Ranson's daughter, Sarah Wilcox, joins me to debate this critical juncture in our nation's history. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my phlogistically prognosticating panel, assistant editor and parliamentary sketch writer of The Spectator, Madeline Grant, and the historian and broadcaster, Dr. Tessa Dunlop. I always want to know your views, mailmog@gbnews.com, but now it's your favourite time of the day, the News Bulletin with Aaron Armstrong.
Thank you, Jacob. Very good evening to you. 2 minutes past 8 here in the GB newsroom. It's emerged the BBC used splice footage of a Donald Trump speech 2 years before it appeared in a Panorama documentary in 2024. The Telegraph is reporting it was used in an episode of Newsnight in 2022. The edit made it look like Mr. Trump was encouraging his supporters to riot on January the 6th. It's claimed concerns were raised within the BBC at the time, but were ignored. Tim Davie, the Director General, and Deborah Turness, the head of BBC News, both resigned over the scandal on Sunday. Well, Mr. Trump, who didn't take questions from reporters in the White House this evening, has given the BBC until tomorrow to apologise and publish a full retraction or face $1 billion legal action. The White House says it's clear the BBC engaged in a pattern of defamation in order to try to interfere in the presidential election. A BBC spokesperson said the corporation holds itself to the highest editorial standards. This matter has been brought to our attention and we are now looking into it. The Conservatives have accused Sir Keir Starmer of a cover-up after he concluded an investigation into briefings against cabinet ministers hours after it had begun. The Prime Minister's apologised to the Health Secretary Wes Streeting over claims he was plotting a leadership challenge, and says he has been assured that any briefings earlier this week did not come from Downing Street. Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch says Labour are trying to sweep it under the carpet, but Sir Keir's promised to deal with those responsible.
I've been assured that no briefing against ministers was done from number 10, but I've made it clear that I find it absolutely unacceptable. If it transpires...
You're saying it didn't come from Downing Street, that
I've been assured it didn't come from Downing Street, but I'd be equally clear that whether it's this case or any other, I intend to deal with it.
A review has identified a catalogue of missed opportunities to save 10-year-old Sarah Sharif before she was murdered by her stepmother and father. It found council staff tried to check on her the day before she died, but they went to the wrong address, adding the 10-year-old should never have been placed in the care of her father and stepmother, describing the killers as a lethal combination. Sarah was found dead in her family home in Woking in 2023 after suffering what was described as horrific abuse. Surrey County Council has said it's deeply sorry. GB News can reveal people smugglers and migrants are operating with near impunity in northern France. Exclusive footage shows groups of men launching dinghies near Calais and wandering through coastal towns wearing life jackets, unchallenged by police. Residents say they feel unsafe, describing rising levels of violence and criminality as smuggling operations continue almost in plain sight along the Channel coast. An Iranian small boat migrant who raped a vulnerable Oxford teenager has been jailed for 12 years and 6 months. Amin Abedi Mofrad assaulted a 15-year-old near the Westgate shopping centre in the city in February last year. The court heard about a string of previous convictions for assault in Germany dating back more than a decade. The Prince of Wales has opened a new access road for Mousehole Football Club in Cornwall, ending years of travel difficulties for players and fans. William, who's also the Duke of Cornwall, helped bring together local businesses to fund and build the road, which replaces a narrow pothole-ridden lane that often caused chaos in the village. The project also created new parking and space for community events, with locals calling it a game changer for the club and the wider area. And finally, let's bring you some live pictures of the billionaire Jeff Bezos' rocket Blue Origin as it prepares for liftoff from Florida It's Cape Canaveral you're looking at, carrying a NASA mission to Mars. Now, it happens after 2 abandoned attempts, so this one is third time lucky. The countdown has been frozen at T-minus 20 seconds some 6 minutes ago, so it is imminent, and we will try and bring some pictures of that to you later here on GB News. That's it for the moment. Now it's back to Jacob.
Well, welcome back to State of the Nation. Look what happened on Newsnight.
To cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women, and we fight. We fight like hell. We're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women, and we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them.
54 minutes apart. He says he's going to march down peacefully to cheer on Republicans, not so much the others. Perfectly reasonable political thing. And 54 minutes later, he says he's going to fight for his country. A perfectly normal form of political expression, which the BBC, not just once, but twice, decided to move together, merge together, allied to give the impression that Donald Trump was encouraging people to riot, was encouraging civil disorder, was so cross that he'd lost the election that he was going to try and upend the Constitution. The first time, it was on Newsnight. Now, Newsnight is not produced by an independent production company. It is produced in-house at the BBC. I was there earlier this week on Monday, and they're charming, delightful people. It's always a pleasure to go on, but it is an in-house BBC Broadcasting House production. And this was 2 years before the Panorama programme, an outsourced programme, did much the same thing. The clips are very marginally different. And what does the BBC do? It blames the production company, whereas in fact Kirsty Walk, who was presenting on the night in question, was told by Mike Mulvaney that your video actually spliced together the presentation. That line about we fight like hell is later in the speech. So the BBC knew, and what did they do? Nothing. And why is this? Do you think it's because they don't like Donald Trump? Do you think because the BBC has an institutionalized metropolitan view that Donald Trump is simply not flavour of the month? He's not one of them. He's not their type of person. He's not papabile, you might say. He's not the sort of person you would invite to dinner in Islington. And because of that, because they don't like him, they believed that he might have said it. And that is why they were willing to broadcast it not just once, but twice. And it is said that a little leaven leavens all the bread. And I think this applies here, because what does that mean? It means that in small things you see the whole. You see from this relatively minor editing error made twice by the BBC something fundamental about the BBC. You see what its view is, what its corporate view is, what the culture of the BBC is, and that is a metropolitan, essentially leftist one that finds Trump distasteful, finds Brexit distasteful, finds conservatism, particularly proper capitalist conservatism, too much to deal with. And that comes through in broadcast after broadcast. They've been caught out. And the question is, with Trump threatening them with a £750 million lawsuit, can the BBC survive this discrediting, this crashing of its reputation? Because a broadcaster depends upon its reputation to have viewers trust it. Why would any Conservative trust the BBC? As ever, let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.com. But I am now joined by my panel. No, I'm not. I'm joined by my former advisor to President Bill Clinton, Jim Kennedy. Mr. Kennedy, thank you very much for joining me.
Good to be with you.
If this had happened to Bill Clinton, I imagine Bill Clinton's supporters would have thought it was pretty disgraceful.
Yes, I think here it's a case of it not being an error, but I do think it was intentional. Listen, I'm a centrist Democrat myself, which is a vanishing breed, but I think what was done here was wholly unfair, and it risks the BBC standing for blatantly biased camera work. And it certainly will, I think we'll find other examples of it happening. I know down in Australia, Sky News Australia has found an example of the ABC Four Corners program doing something quite similar. And it speaks, I think, a bias against conservatives in this case.
And it's very damaging for trust, because people who are in politics are always cautious about giving pre-recorded interviews because they know they can be cut. They prefer to do live interviews. But broadcasters need the pre-records, and no sensible politician will do a pre-record with the BBC anymore.
Yeah, this is, as you said, 50 minutes apart, the two parts of the speech which they cobble together. It's okay to excerpt a soundbite. That's why politicians speak in sound bites. But this is sound bias because you're pulling together two different strands and making it sound different for the audience. That's propaganda. That's not journalism.
And speaking as a moderate Democrat, do you think that the sort of hysterical attacks on President Trump have actually made him stronger, that there are some perfectly valid criticisms to be made of your president, but they get sort of washed away because people look at the mainstream media and its hysterical opposition to him and discount almost everything that's now said?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I do think President Trump should have accepted the results of the election. I worked for Al Gore in the White House. After the Supreme Court ruled in his election, he accepted the results and he presided over the certification of those results. I wish that had happened in 2020, but that's no excuse for launching basically a biased campaign against him. I think the Democratic Party has made a mistake in focusing too much attention on the personality of Donald Trump and not focusing just on policies with which you can have a real disagreement.
And does this make a difference between the relationship of the UK and Donald Trump, or does he just hold it to the account of the BBC? Because so far he seems to have got on quite well with Sir Keir Starmer.
I think he's capable of compartmentalizing those issues. I don't think it'll damage the relationship. Certainly here in America, we have problems with coverage as well. We recently saw CBS now being overseen by Barry Weiss, who has credentials in conservative politics to some extent. Perhaps the BBC may undergo similar reforms in the future to help adjust it. I think journalism, mainstream journalism, has leaned too far left. My old boss at News Corp, Robert Thompson, talks about the objective of being objective. That's what should guide journalism. And that's been lost along the way because I think, as you mentioned, they've become elitist in their viewpoint, and they basically engage in groupthink, and that's harmful to the craft of journalism.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Robert Thompson, who my father was a huge admirer of when he was editor of The Times. Anyway, Mr. Kennedy, thank you very much for joining me, and let me now go to my most phlogistically prognosticating panel, Madeline Grant and Tessa Dunlop. Tessa, can you defend the BBC?
What I find distasteful, not just you, but GB News and its tone over recent days, and also The Telegraph, is the gleeful way in which you've reported coverage of a clear error, a clear case of whether subconscious or deliberate bias, I don't know, against one of Britain's national treasures, one of our best known, best respected brands, both nationally and internationally, and I find that distasteful.
But it's no good.
Consider yourself reprimanded.
No, I don't, because it's no good being a national treasure if you're tarnished.
Yes.
And it's deeply tarnished, it's failed, but this is symptomatic of how the BBC behaves, and it's extraordinary arrogance, and if its only defence is it's a national treasure, that's
No,
hopeless.
I'm not defending it. I just don't like the way you seemingly take great delight in the very public flagellation, which rightly has to take place. But I think there's ways of doing this in a slightly less, ooh, look, goody-goody. How can we punch them a bit more?
Because they're banged to rights. They've pretended for years they're not biased, and now we have
Actually,
the
no,
evidence. That's where I bring Madeline in.
It could be, and I believe it is an error. Yes, perhaps there has been a bit of anti-Trump sentiment within the BBC, reflected, by the way, in Britain at large. But I don't think that's institutional bias.
I disagree. I think it's very
very deliberate, and the fact that it happened twice makes it almost impossible to argue as a result of basic human error, because it's a very deliberate thing to find two clips from quite far away in the footage and to splice them together in such a disingenuous way. And the fact that it's happening not only twice, but in two completely separate programmes with different people doing it, it does suggest a motivated agenda. I suppose part of the reason that some on the right are adopting a tone that, well, Tester thinks is a gleeful one, is partly because for a long time, those of us who have raised these concerns, and for some of us, I would include myself in this category, it comes from the position of somebody who wants the BBC to be decent again, who can remember when the programming was of significantly higher quality and with less editorialising. And we've been kind of gaslit and told that it's not true, that we're imagining it, that this is a kind of right-wing plot. And, you know, it's happening even now when there's very clear evidence of wrongdoing that's sort of undeniable, and not just with the Trump footage, but in all sorts of other areas exposed by the memo. And there are still commentators and many MPs, people like Ed Davey, going full bunker mentality, saying that it's all a kind of right-wing coup that's been imagined by Robbie Gibb, when you're arguing against provable reality at this point.
I think where Robbie Gibb did undeniable harm is he clearly delayed the BBC, who are, and I have personal experience of this, extraordinarily slow when it comes to delivering verdicts, edicts, letters, apologies as a corporation. But he made that worse, and I believe he probably had a political agenda to ensure that the BBC...
We've got no evidence for that at all, Tessa. You're just making that up.
I'm not making it up. He was on the board, and it's quite clear that there was an extraordinary delay of over a week.
He's one member of the board.
OK.
He's not the chairman of the board.
But we also know that he has, if we're talking about bias, he has his own clear political bias.
But so do lots of other members of the board. That's always been the case. The board has been made up of people of different political views to have representation on the board, and the board doesn't make editorial decisions.
But just to clarify, this whole dossier, the Michael Prescott dossier, I mean, it's not worrying, is it, about what the new leader of the Green Party is saying and whether he's being sufficiently represented. The wind is in the sails of the right in terms of this dossier. And I found myself on Radio 4 and World Tonight having to actually debunk some nonsense from a so-called History Reclaim party who had used the dossier to claim that the way in which the BBC reported history was biased. I mean, it's never-ending. It's just any chance to attack
Actually,
auntie.
we focused on Trump, but there was some pretty shameful reporting in Gaza, where they said that a mass grave was left by the Israeli forces when they themselves had reported a few months earlier that it was Hamas.
Yes, exactly. And there was also, terrible shortcomings in the way that they were reporting issues to do with gender identity and to do with biological sex. And to the point where they have basically an in-house unit that does all of the LGBT reporting. And it's clear that that unit has entirely bought into the Stonewall idea of gender and sexuality. And consequently, it's not just meant that lies have been told to people and journalists have been reprimanded for stating biological reality. I think it also means that the BBC cannot really carry out its job without fear or favour, because if you've been ideologically captured, you're going to be asleep at the wheel for major news stories. And I wonder if, you know, we heard from about Newsnight earlier. They did some absolutely fantastic reporting about the Tavistock Clinic with Hannah Barnes. And I fear that that was a few years ago now. The atmosphere reported in the memo suggests to me that they wouldn't be able to do that kind of story again. And the BBC needs to get its house in order. It's those of us who want it to survive should not be in the kind of bunker and pretending that this stuff is, you know, we can ignore it because it's politically motivated.
And it does.
It's really interesting, though, isn't it? Because we talk about the need for the BBC to be impartial, but every single set of headlines has been selected. And I would argue, as someone who sits... I'm pretty centre, by the way. I'm not as left as you like to make me out. This is all relative. You are a hard right channel, in my opinion. But I often think, oh, God, the BBC are going with the boats again. Once again, they've taken their agenda from the right-leaning tabloids. And actually, I often have issue because I think they're not pioneering and sufficiently brave. I don't consider them ideologically captured. They may have been naive on the transgender issue. But in terms of Israel and Palestine, in fact, I think they delivered some sort of corrective. But those who support Palestine say, oh, they give 33 times more attention to an individual Israeli death than to a Palestinian one.
Is they should lose the licence fee, become commercial, and then they could be as biased as they like. It would be business. Anyway, we're very lucky. We are very, very lucky because we've got a statement from a BBC spokesman who said the BBC holds itself to the highest editorial standards. Don't laugh. This matter has been brought to our attention and we are now looking into it. jolly good of them. Now, thank you very much to Mr. Kennedy and indeed to my panel. In a moment, economic growth slowed to 0.1% in the last quarter, lower than was forecast. But we're still reeling from the repercussions of a cyber attack on Jaguar Land Rover last month. So what do today's figures tell us? Celebration or dread ahead of the budget? Plus, something very exciting which the auto queue isn't telling me. We'll have to wait for that until after the messages from our sponsors.
Westminster's full of talk, but out here, it's the real world.
Am I allowed to talk now?
No, that's it. This is where it matters, real people and real lives. That's what politics is all about.
In fact, has Trump made a good start? No.
Straight answers, no spin, and just a couple of pints.
How many fingers have I got up?
About 10. So join me for Lee Anderson's Real World every Friday at 7 p.m, only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
There's a lot of tables out there that won't just have turkey on it. There'll be turkey and ham, and but I know some people that will cook 3 or 4 different meats. And obviously the joy of having turkey is that you can then make a turkey curry for Boxing Day and the subsequent days. So, you know, you should be having days of curry after your turkey lunch. I think for the masses, it's still hugely popular. You know, through the festive period at the Dog, we will have hundreds of people having Christmas parties, and most of them will order our turkey lunch or dinner. And then Christmas Day, we could sell it probably 3 or 4 times. The demand for people to go out for the traditional turkey roast is still massive. But hey, look, if you don't like a roast lunch, then why force yourself to have it on the, you know, probably one of the most important meals of the day in terms of bringing family together.
What about Sophie's point, Mark, about cost and spending £30, £40 on turkey? That is simply too expensive for lots of people.
Yeah, I'll never be able to defend or debate that. You know, I know more than anyone the challenges around food inflation, and a good turkey has become a huge cost. But I still think where people can afford the tradition, the joy of coming together, sharing a big turkey roast meal it's a brilliant Christmas tradition. But yeah, the food inflation, that's something we've talked about a number of times, isn't it? You know, it's crippling our business and it's crippling people at homes. I suppose the key thing to look at is if you know what you're doing with it, a good turkey will feed the family for many days. It's not just one meal.
GB News, the People's Channel.
You want to know what's really going on in the corridors of power? Labour don't know what to do with you half the time, and that makes you quite lethal in the chamber. Get behind the headlines with Chopper's Political Podcast. Join me, Christopher Hope, as I sit down with the great and the good of British politics. We'll see where this ruling takes us. These are the stories shaping our nation. Chopper's Political Podcast, available now on all platforms. Listen in and stay ahead.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and we were talking about Trump and the BBC, and your views have come steaming in on the Mail Moggs. Michael says, it clearly shows what we all know so well, an obvious anti-Trump agenda all across the BBC. James says this all begs the question, how many more speeches by how many other people have been doctored? It's highly unlikely that Mr. Trump is the only person the BBC dislikes. 2 deliberate incidents that we know of. No doubt there are others. And Grant says this is very serious. If it happened to Trump, how many similar attempts were there to mislead the public? With the budget fast approaching, all eyes are on the economy. Growth slowed to just 0.1% this quarter as the economy struggles to recover from a cyber attack on Jaguar Land Rover, costing an estimated £1.9 billion to the manufacturing sector. With Chancellor's statement less than a fortnight away, today she said, we had the fastest growing economy in the G7 in the first half of the year, but there's more to do to build an economy that works for working people. Is this optimism warranted, or are we heading towards an economic doom loop? Well, I'm joined now by my panel, Madeline Grant and Tessa Dunlop. Madeline, it seems to me that this is a self-created problem by the Chancellor, that there was a lot of front-running of the tax changes that came in March, so the first quarter of the year was quite strong. since then, businesses have done less business, employment's gone down, unemployment's gone up, and inflation's gone up. This is all Rachel Reeves' fault.
Yes, and the other part of the problem is that because Labour MPs haven't had many positive things to talk about, a lot of them, in a search for some good news, have really led on the line about being the fastest growing economy in the G7. And they've said that relentlessly. And now, of course, that turns out to have not been the case. And it was actually, for the reasons you outline, quite easily predictable. I think a similar mistake was made recently when many Labour MPs talked about Channel boat numbers slowing, which was actually to do with bad weather. But then the numbers began again, and we had a record crossing, and they all had egg on their face. So it's a problem of economic mismanagement, but also one of basic comms.
I don't think that's entirely true, is it? I mean, our economy was the fastest growing in the G7 in the first quarter of this year.
Yes, but that's because of a lot of...
I know why it's because, but it also, we can't suddenly say it was no longer true. That they said what was true, what was in front of them was the economy was growing nicely.
But I think they made a run for their own
politician,
backs.
Jacob Rees-Mogg included, when he sees a good set of economic statistics, gets out his trumpet and blows it, and that's quite
not necessarily, actually, because you have to be aware of the context of the figures, because if you're not, a month later you look very silly. That if you have a lot of activity in March prior to tax changes in April, you oughtn't to be saying in the middle of April how marvellous March was, because you'll look silly in May.
You're right, it's something politicians do, but the Tories have been made to look stupid for doing this in the previous administration. I mean, it's never wise to overpromise and to therefore make a rod for your own back, I think.
We could flip it, couldn't we, and say that the Office for National Statistics confirmed that the blip that was... I think it was negative growth in September was due to this attack on Jaguar and car exports, and that actually things will recover slightly. But more broadly, what the Labour government have come up against, irrespective of whether you think Keir Starmer's able to manage the personnel in number 10, is this extraordinary headwind against Britain's ability to deliver in terms of productivity. And it's stymied your government, and it's stymieing his government, and it's bigger than any one administration. It's actually national malaise. And rather than sort of yabu sucking and blaming it all on the cut of Rachel Reeves' jib, we need to really think about why that is.
What about the 6.6% increase in pay to the public sector against 4.2% pay increase to the private sector in the relevant period? That they've been stuffing the mouths of their own side with gold whilst taking it from the productive side of the economy. Of course you're going to have a problem with productivity to do that.
If you remember the dying embers of the Conservative administration, there was strike after strike, and actually became very hard to know whether you could go to work because your child wouldn't be at school, whether you could go to work because you wouldn't have your knee operation, or whether you could get on a bus or a tram.
OK, so we've now had an advert from Tessa for the 1970s. The lesson of the 1980s surely is you don't give in to strikes, and as soon as you do, everybody, it's the Dane Geld question, everyone asks for more geld.
Yes, well, it does feel a bit there are echoes of the 1970s. And one of the echoes, of course, because I didn't live through the 1970s, but I definitely, what really gets me is the way that things that were not normal, a general malaise, things not working properly, and people just not bothering to turn up and deliver the thing that they're supposed to deliver. I get the trains a lot. Catastrophe, terrible, and people can't be bothered to turn up and man the trains at the very early hours, right? I hate the fact that this has been normalised. This is now the new normal. If the train turns up on time, I'm pleasantly surprised. That's not how things ought to be.
Do you know, and I know this will make me unpopular and there'll be a sort of, almighty GBNews groan, but if you look at where systemically Britain's come unstuck, because our growth was phenomenal, really, up until the early 2000s relative to the other G7 players.
Yes.
You have the nightmare that is 2008, and then you have, uniquely to Britain, Brexit, on top of which you can apply the pandemic. And we now see this revolving door phenomenon where Keir Starmer is clearly a marked man, which started post-2016. And actually, my main criticism of the Labour administration is that they haven't gone to the root of the problem and tried to open a wider door to Europe.
All right, well, Brexit, regardless what effect it's had on, we've grown faster than Germany, who, as far as I'm aware, hasn't left the European Union, and about the same as France. So I think the Brexit argument is nonsense.
Absolutely right. If you see the graph where it goes from 2008, we never fully recover from that time. And in fact, it's the story of much of Europe. I think the biggest story is America absolutely steaming ahead and Europe being left behind.
But what is the change? Under Margaret Thatcher, we free up labour markets, we deal with the unions, we have an economic policy that's very pro-growth. We then have years of Labour government which undermines growth. We then, from 2000 out, have very expensive energy across Europe.
Yes.
It's mad green policies that have had a terrible effect
it's
on
a catastrophic
the economy.
act of self-harm. I think under Blair you do have growth, but it's a fairly illusory kind because he actually inherits a booming economy and I think basically spends and then borrows, which leaves us in not a very good position when the crash comes. So I think you're living in a slightly fantasy land with a great deal of borrowed money propelling the illusion of growth, but not real growth, you know.
Actually, to be fair to Gordon Brown, he was fiscally, I think, very restrained in Labour's first term. Later, he unleashed the spending.
Well, he followed Conservative spending plans, and this led to a very strong position of the public finances because the plans had been quite tight. The economy was growing, so tax revenues were strong. We were actually paying off some of the national debt at that point, thanks to the economic policies of all people, Ken Clarke, not one of your head-banging right-wingers, and prior to him, Norman Lamont, whose response to Black Wednesday was exceptionally good.
So if we admit that one of the problems is we had, and you remember there was all sorts of euphoric events as well. The Olympics came to London, the Queen jumped out of an aeroplane. You know, there was a cool Britannia vibe that carried on really even to the end of the last Labour administration. And we've never been able to get it back.
The Queen jumping out of an aeroplane was 2012. The Conservative coalition was in office by then.
Only just.
2 years.
Only just, but bringing the Olympics to London happened under the Blair government. The Blair government. That kind of idea that all good things were happening in Britain. And it's quite extraordinary how that narrative has been flipped on its head. And it's not just here in Britain, it's when you go abroad, it's a perception of us. And I don't still understand why, and if you think it's so simple, why it couldn't have been resolved in the 14 years when the Tories were in power.
Because we bought into all green nonsense.
I think if we had the Olympic Games now, we'd spend a lot of money and do a good job and everyone would leave with a spring in their step, but I'm not sure what it would fundamentally change. And I think with the Olympics opening ceremony, I mean, much of it was marvellous, but we did have to have the obligatory show of deference to the great national monarch at the NHS.
But it was the idea that Britain was tail up. And we're no longer tail up, even when we have some kind of ridiculous bloated coronation.
Who is tail up at the moment in Europe?
Nobody in Europe, because...
Actually, some of the East European economies are outstripping the growth of the West
capitalism
European.
And it's going fantastically well in Poland, for example.
But that's what we're getting to. What's really interesting about this discussion is that economic effects are much more long-term than you think, and that the decisions made by Margaret Thatcher in the early 1980s led to a period of nearly 20 years of economic growth. The decisions taken subsequently that have been much more regulatory, have been much more thinking that the state can run the economy, have held not just us, but the whole of Europe back, because Europe, other than the Eastern European countries, were taking exactly the same decisions.
The one, Mr. Omer, I want to challenge you on, because I can't sit here and just listen to it being repeated ad infinitum, is our energy prices are high because they're pegged to the price of gas. And in fact, when you invest in new energy, we are so obviously well placed. Do you know, they're about to have to take 10 million people out of the capital city of Iran because of the drought. You know, we are so well placed to lead the green revolution with wind and wave.
The reason we have high energy prices is because we don't allow gas to run efficiently, and we insist on having all these renewables, which are extraordinarily expensive.
Up front they are, but in the longer term they're cheaper. In the longer term, all the prognostics are to bring down the cost.
Millions to this offshore Scottish energy, which we don't then even use. We're paying them not to use their energy, and that falls on consumers and on businesses who've all left the country.
Is it not the case that we have divested ourselves quicker and more thoroughly than almost any other Western country? And if that were true, we should now have some of the cheapest energy, but in fact we have the highest industrial energy price.
Now, hold on, because something exciting has happened and it relates to the BBC and Mr. Trump. So let's go to Aaron Armstrong to find out what's up.
Thank you, Jacob. And the big breaking news tonight is that the BBC has now apologised to Donald Trump over the editing of a speech which you'll be well aware appeared on Panorama in 2024. The BBC's added that it was an error of judgment. Samir Shah, the BBC chairman, has already apologised for that earlier this week. And the BBC has confirmed that the programme, the Panorama programme, will not be broadcast again in this form on any BBC platforms. Now, you will be aware also that Donald Trump gave the BBC until 10 p.m. tomorrow night to apologise and make a full retraction or face a legal threat of $1 billion. So it appears the BBC has come in more than 24 hours ahead of that to try to dampen this story down. However, it comes shortly off the back of other breaking news this evening that may well complicate things for the BBC, because it has been accused of airing a misleading edit of a speech by Donald Trump, a similar version of that speech by Donald Trump, 2 years earlier than it appeared in Panorama. The Telegraph saying it was used in an episode of Newsnight back in 2022 and was challenged by a guest on the programme at the time who criticised the splicing of the footage. It's claimed those concerns were raised within the BBC but were ignored. Earlier this week, you'll be aware, Director General Tim Davie and the head of news, Deborah Turness, resigned. The corporation, as I mentioned, made an apology for an error of judgment in that Panorama programme. Of course, we'll have to see what they say about the Newsnight programme. The BBC says it's looking into it. Mr Trump, of course, had given the BBC time till tomorrow to retract that and apologise or face that legal threat. It's not clear if that will now go away, because the White House has said tonight it's clear the BBC engaged in a pattern of defamation in order to try and interfere in the presidential election. That comes shortly after the Newsnight revelations. And we have had a statement from the BBC which says it holds itself to the highest editorial standards. The Newsnight matter has been brought to its attention, and the BBC says they are now looking into it. So that is the big breaking news tonight, Jacob. The BBC has now issued a full apology to Donald Trump for the spliced footage it used of his Capitol Hill speech back in 2021, and says the programme will not be used on any BBC platforms in future.
Tune into GB News Radio wherever you are, online, on DAB digital radio, on TuneIn, on Radio Player and on your smart speaker. Just say, play GB News.
Well, that's exciting but not unexpected news. I'm back now with my panel, Madeline Grant and Tessa Dunlop. Madeline, an apology a day keeps the lawyers away, but they might be apologising again tomorrow.
Oh, my goodness. I mean, that is the way it feels. And we also wonder, will the apology suffice for the president? Will it be something where, given our very close relationship as a country, he's willing to let bygones be bygones now that he's had this coveted apology, or if he will be going for the jugular and looking to exact how much compensation? We shall see. I mean, it's Donald Trump sometimes does have a reputation for being vengeful, but then equally, look at the way that he warmed up to our own cabinet, despite many of the things that they said about him before he returned to the White House. So we shall see.
I mean, he has a reputation in America for taking on and fighting some of the media organisations over there, and a couple have found money down the back of their sofa. I think that was more to do with their own licensing accords and wanting to curry favour with the White House. Two things. One, I have this on good legal authority in America. The $1 billion, price tag, that's performative nonsense. That's not worth the paper that it's written on. I mean, it makes great headlines, but it's not worth the paper it's written on. The second thing is, I'm not sure the defamation case. I mean, this being spliced together on Icky Mickey Newsnight, which since has had a massive editorial overhaul because no one was watching it. I mean, I don't really think that Donald Trump can claim this had a massive impact on his ability to reascend to the presidency. So I think he would be skating on thin ice in terms of winning a lawsuit.
Well, and America, very importantly, has much stronger protections for freedom of speech than we do.
Indeed.
A counter to that, and I don't know about Florida, but a lot of civil cases in America are decided by juries. And a jury for the American president against a foreign corporation sometimes finds that the foreign corporation can pay a lot of money, and that's certainly happened in the past.
OK, yeah, but it would depend on which premise that you were suing the BBC. I mean, if they're going to come to the case and say, well, we clearly made an error, it was quite low down the chain. Like John Birch, remember the old Director General, has basically said, well, do I have to account for every single guff at local radio level? I think words to that effect. And this is really what it is. It's actually being blindsided by sloppiness.
That's the last time Tessa's invited on Newsnight, calling it local radio.
No, I said this was
very
Back in the day, before it's had a very impressive editorial overhaul, it's now very impressive.
I don't know. I always like going on with Kirsty Moore.
If I had to guess, and making predictions on TV is always a bad idea. I think it will be fine because Donald Trump will want to be invited to Windsor Castle again, or to see our royal family.
So it's all going to be up to the King to save Auntie. Anyway, thank you very much for my panel. Coming up in just a moment. A piece of cloth taken from Hitler's bunker by an American soldier has allowed genetic scientists to prove the age-old legend that the dictator did have only one you-know-what. History has a remarkable trend of myths and legends turning out to be true.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
From the school run to the home run, watch a new show for all of Britain.
He can say whatever he wants.
A straight-talking show where all voices are heard.
And, you know, when are we going to stop talking about smashing the gangs and actually do it?
With the stories that matter from every part of our country.
There's a bit of a crash landing there for your Chancellor.
Bold, fearless and standing up for you. That's me, Martin Daubney, 3 p.m. till 6 p.m, weekdays, here only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster's full of talk, but out here, it's the real world.
Am I allowed to talk
No,
now?
that's it. This is where it matters, real people and real lives. That's what politics is all about.
In fact, has Trump made a good start? No.
Straight answers, no spin, and just a couple of pints.
How many fingers have I got up? About 10.
So join me for Lee Anderson's Real World every Friday at 7 p.m, only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You want to know what's really going on in the corridors of power? Labour don't know what to do with you half the time, and that makes you quite lethal in the chamber. Get behind the headlines with Chopper's political podcast. Join me, Christopher Hope, as I sit down with the great and the good of British politics. We'll see where this ruling takes us. These are the stories shaping our nation. Chopper's political podcast, available now on all platforms. Listen in and stay ahead.
Britain deserves a newsroom that puts the facts and your voice first.
Well, and that's what you get on GB News. Lively debates, lively conversation.
And we're not afraid to hold power to account.
And each other. So join me, Andrew Pierce.
And me, Miriam Gates, for Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 on GB News.
At GB News, we love to hear from you, our loyal community. So drop us a line at gbnews.com/yoursay. There, you can talk to each other and also to the presenters live on air. gbnews.com/yoursay. Because GB News is your channel, Britain's news channel.
My whistling isn't very good, but in May 1945, an American soldier entered the bunker of a defeated and deceased Adolf Hitler and was met by a blood-stained sofa. Colonel Roswell P. Rosengren took a piece of the upholstery with him, and today, scientific prowess has allowed geneticists to prove the age-old tale. The Nazi dictator did have only one of the two things possessed by most men, and I'm not talking about eyes. In a broader context, this is the latest example of myths and legends from history being proved by modern science, including things like the parting of the Red Sea. Well, my panel is still with me, Madeline Grant and Tessa Dunlop. Tessa, bring in your historical expertise. This is the thing that really interests me. There's this silly song, which we all know, and it turns out to be true.
It is fascinating, and it makes you think, so the grain of truth, somebody knew something about Hitler's compromised genitalia. It appears, this comes from a Channel 4 documentary, they have made other extrapolations which are a little bit, I think, less savoury, but this particular one, it's a Kalman syndrome, and they've been able to confirm that Hitler had it, and therefore he possibly did have compromised genitalia. What's interesting is when he was imprisoned after the Beer Hall Putsch in 1923, the doctor in the Landsberg prison observed that on the right-hand side of his genitalia there was something going on. So whether that report got out or other people knew, it was on the wind that people were aware there was something down under when it came to Hitler.
Wow.
But it's
what a time to be alive. I never thought I'd come to work today and hear the sentence, Hitler's compromised genitalia. How wonderful.
Yes, indeed, nor did I. We are before the watershed. But Troy turns out to be real. It's these things that are in the popular consciousness have a remarkable tendency to be true.
There's a grain of truth. The Hitler one is interesting because I think there is a reading, as Tessa says, that somebody knew something and it sort of trickled down to the general consciousness. But there's also just the likelihood that we were engaged with war against Germany. And it is quite funny to, suggest that perhaps the leader was compromised in other ways, that maybe it was just an attempt to kind of question the virility of the man that we're currently fighting.
But isn't it true all these people who try and fight Britain are funny? So the Kaiser had a withered arm. Napoleon was a midget. That on and on it goes.
And maybe that mentality
Philip II had a funny jaw.
Well, actually,
you fight England and you're a funny fellow.
Well, except when you turn the tables and look at Scotland. I mean, William Wallace apparently was a very fine and upstanding man.
He was a brigand.
I think that if we go back to Hitler and the Kalman, if you look at this syndrome, apparently 10% of individuals with the Kalman syndrome have a micropenis and fluctuating levels of testosterone at best. And then the question is, OK, so Hitler, if he couldn't fulfil those primal functions, was married instead to the fatherland with these grotesque, distorted consequences. Where I'm a bit more worried is that the extrapolation from this blood sample, which was apparently a match, has led other people to suggest he may have had, possibly autism. And then that you're in very shaky terrain there. What's you're suggesting that anyone with autism has a propensity to possibly be a mini Hitler?
But you can say that these deformities have an effect, can't you? Because the Kaiser did have a withered arm. He was very self-conscious about it. And that he behaved very oddly, and that Napoleon suffered in extremis from short man syndrome.
Yes.
There does seem to be a
There is also
trend.
this idea of history that's become extremely popular in university courses, etc., that basically says that personality is not that important. The history is always kind of bottom up. But I think actually stories like this do suggest that often it's extremely personal and links to personal circumstances. With the Kaiser, you can trace his deteriorating relationship with Britain to, firstly, his difficult childhood and his deformity, but also a few very awkward encounters that he has when he comes to visit England at various times.
I think where it becomes uncomfortable is the idea that if you have an abnormality, that we then extrapolate and presume, how are you going to behave?
Yes.
And also that there needed to be a bit of a rebalancing where everything was about great or horrific personification of evil, predominantly men.
Exactly.
And actually, they need to be able to ride the crest of either a terrible or a good wave to arrive in their place, to execute their power.
We'd better move on, but thank you very much to my panel. The Assisted Suicide Bill returns to Parliament tomorrow to begin its committee stage in the House of Lords, presenting an opportunity for peers to scrutinise and amend this dangerous law. Nearly 1,000 amendments have been tabled, demonstrating the extent of concern over the bill's safety, scope and rushed processes. Should the House of Lords take the opportunity to put an end to this destructive legislation? Well, I'm joined now by the campaigner and the daughter of Dame Esther Ranson, Rebecca Wilcox. Thank you very much for joining me. First of all, can I ask how your mother is? Because obviously she's been a leading campaigner for this bill and herself has not been well.
No, indeed, she has terminal stage 4 cancer. I just want to make a small correction, and I know that you will not be pleased with me, but it isn't the assisted suicide bill, it is the assisted dying bill, because by the very nature of it, you have to have a terminal diagnosis, you have to have 6 months or less left to live. And I wouldn't say that's suicide. I mean, I know that my mother is not suicidal. My mum would love to keep going, if not for me, for her adored grandchildren. So suicide is a very strong word and doesn't...
It is suicide. It is allowing people to kill themselves. That is suicide. And I think the point over the name is really important, because this is trying to pretend, by calling it assisted dying, that it isn't what it is. It's about people killing themselves.
I think it's really interesting that you feel that strongly about it. But what I would say is what is killing these people is their terminal diagnosis. In my mum's case, it's hundreds of tumours all over her body that are rapidly destroying her cells and making it impossible for her to live, and possibly making her have the most awful, painful death. I don't think anybody who has seen somebody in such pain, dying from such an awful thing, would call what she is asking for, which is a medical release from suffering. She is already dying. She doesn't have much longer left to live. All she wants is a certain drug that will make her end pain-free.
We're all going to die eventually, and this bill has very few safeguards to protect people. Doctors don't know about 6 months, that many people live longer than 6-month diagnosis, and there aren't protections even for the under-18s in the bill.
That's not true. It is called the Assisted Dying Bill for Adults. Under-18s cannot apply for it.
Well,
and there
amendments were put forward at the committee stage in the House of Commons, which were objected to. Which would have put in more protections for people, and they were consistently objected to.
They were the objections were to further amendments. The amendments that were agreed upon were the ones where if you are over the age of 18 and a panel has judged that you are mentally capable, not under coercion. There are more safeguards in this law than any other law. It is modeled very closely on Oregon.
That's not quite right,
no
though.
widening on it.
Because we were promised there would be a safeguard with a judge, and the judge was taken out in the House of Commons.
Because it was deemed it would actually be more acceptable, more fitting with the protocols that were allowed to have a senior legal figure. A judge wouldn't have been able to spare the time. So in fact, they've got social workers, 2 independent doctors and a senior legal figure. It is stronger as it is.
Why would you trust a social worker with all the failures we've had in social work, when judges are very experienced in making judgments, and we're told this won't apply to many people? And now you're saying it'll apply to so many people that the judges won't have time to do it.
I have huge respect for the social work profession. My sister is a former social worker. She spent hours and hours outside of her time in work, desperately trying to help the families that she was working on.
We've had terrible scandals with social workers.
We've had terrible scandals with MPs. What would you say about that?
We have, yes. That's why I wouldn't let them kill people off. That's why I think assisted suicide is such a disaster. Anyway, Rebecca, thank you for joining me, because I've got to finish there. But earlier this week, I demonstrated on this programme how to make the perfect martini. Well, after today's programme, I'm going to Claridge's, where I hope to enjoy a splendid martini to commemorate the 83rd birthday of Nanny. Veronica Crook, 60 of her 83 years have been spent looking after the Rees-Mogg family. And I hope we will have many more years and martinis to come. Anyway, that's all from me. It's the one and only Patrick Christie's next, who I hope will also be enjoying a martini or two.
Absolutely. Jacob, thank you very much. Our audience is going to need it after this. The big breaking news. The BBC has apologised to President Trump, but they're saying that there's no case for defamation, and I don't think this apology goes far enough. I think he's still going to sue. That's next.
Warm and cosy, with a chance of zero visibility. Boxed Boilers sponsors the weather on GB News.
Good evening. This is your GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. Storm Claudia is heading our way. It's going to bring some very wet and windy weather across parts of central and southern England and Wales. Now, the low itself was named by the Spanish Met Service because it's already brought heavy thundery rain across parts of Spain and Portugal. But now we're going to see some of that wet weather pushing in from the south. Starting off overnight, a band of rain will push in across many parts of England and Wales, but more wet weather to come as we go through tomorrow. Actually, across much of Scotland, there will be some clear skies, a few showers which could be wintry, but many places dry through the night and cold, temperatures dropping several degrees below freezing here because of Arctic air and those clear skies. A much milder start to the day across southern parts, but it is going to be cloudy for most, and there will be some of that heavy rain around and blustery winds too. Southern counties largely dry to start off with, but cloudy across more central parts, and plenty of rain here through the morning, and across Northern Ireland and parts of Northern England, cloudy with a few outbreaks of rain at times too. The brighter story though across Scotland, and it's going to stay largely bright here through much of the day, still just a few perhaps wintry showers pushing through at times, but the bigger talking point is the very wet and windy weather that